Thank you, Yosuke. There we go. Hello, everyone. Hi from California. It's great to meet you all. I see lots of familiar faces in the crowd, but lots of new people as well. I'm going to try to speak slowly. I know, unfortunately, my Japanese is 0, so I will go speak as slowly and give Yosuke lots of time to translate what I'm going through.
はい、日本語できませんのでゆっくりしゃべるようにしますということで言っております。またクラウド業界でですね、お見かけした顔も多いかと思いますが、また改めましてよろしくお願いいたします。
This, I thought this presentation would be really an interesting time to look back. It's been just about 3 years since my co-founders and I started Rancher, and about four, almost 5 years since Docker really got started. And it's amazing how quickly it's progressed through IT organizations in the US and around the world.
はい、うちの会社ですね、本当に2010年に生まれましたけども、今世界市場で非常に大きなムーブメントとなってこのコンテナの世界が市場が動いております。それはもう予想できないほどのですね、広がりとスピードで広がっておりますということです。
I remember when Docker came out, I was still involved in my previous startup. I was working on cloud computing, infrastructure as a service technology called CloudStack, and I remember that we had been working on a big project at Citibank to try and figure out how to build a private cloud made up of both Amazon resources and dedicated resources on premise. And for all the world, we couldn't come up with a good abstraction. We tried using LXC and other tools, and then Docker appeared, and we all were like, "Oh, yes, this is going to work great." And so, as soon as I got the chance, I was really excited to start Rancher and begin looking at what I think of as the third phase of virtualization.
かなりちょっと長いんで訳しにくいんですけども、マイシティバンクというですね、会社さんとクラウド .com、クラウドスタックというものをやってたメンバーたちですから、そことですね、いろいろなプロジェクトをやったという時に、非常に苦労した覚えがありますけども、非常にですね、彼の会社、前の会社クラウドスタックということで、またこのようにですね、日本にですね、来れて、このようなビジネスを展開できるというのは非常にエキサイティングなことで、彼も非常に最近楽しんでおります。
So why is Docker so exciting? From an enterprise perspective, there's a couple things that really have the potential to change how we think about computers. So the first thing is Docker, in so many ways, it really changes from thinking of a computer as a highly configured, customizable thing to now becoming almost a machine, a simple system that we can play over and over again the exact same bit of code. And I think that's what's driven this incredible growth we're seeing over the last 3 years. As containers have become more and more popular, we're seeing billions and billions of pulls coming from Docker Hub. But if you answer that question, why is Docker important? It's clearly not a replacement for VMs. And when I look at Rancher, 90% of the Rancher deployments are on VMs. They're using VMs as the compute layer. They're mostly on Amazon or VMware or some other public cloud.
なぜそんなにですね、Docker が重要なのかということありますけど、先ほどお見せしたように非常にダウンロードとプルですね、そういうのも増えておりますし、それからですね、これからご説明する技術的なですね、アーキテクチャの違いというのが非常に重要になってきますので、その辺についてシャノンからご説明したいと思います。
So what companies are using it for is not, if it's not a replacement for VMs, then why are so many people using it? The reality is we're using it as an application packaging technology and giving us the ability to package up not just single components, but rather entire stacks of technology to deliver a function. So as you can imagine, in the past, I would have taken a single Linux host, installed multiple packages, jar files, bar files, different types of code on there. With Docker, I can bundle these things into a single image, bring it up very quickly alongside all of the necessary dependencies.
よくこの Docker を使う上で一つのコードをですねどのインフラでも使えるというのはよく常套句としてありますが、やはりそのアプリケーションをですねパッケージ化して、使っていくことができるということで、このいろんな環境下にですね同じように、アプリケーションのパッケージ化されたものがデプロイしていけるというそういうメリットがあると思います。
Because of this, it allows us to do a lot of things. Once we can package up all of our application into a single executable, into a single file, it makes an infinite number of different changes possible in how we run our deployments. Maybe the best example is this. If I'm going to do an upgrade in an application today, and I have my code deployed on a single VM, I would bring up maybe another VM, and I would just go and deploy the new version of my software to that. So this is a very common upgrade. It's kind of a blue-green upgrade, deploying my code and then deploying a second VM. With Docker now, I can do all of that on the same host. I can do all of that on my laptop. I can do all of that in the cloud. So wherever I'm doing things, I can now run them on the same hosts. I can, compress things down and isolate them even when they're running on the same OS. So we have this new layer of abstraction which allows for better segmenting of functions and capturing it. The closest analogy I can think of is this is the difference between a CD and playing the music manually. You move from every time having to deploy it independently to now being able to simply hit play and have the music play on any system anywhere.
まず左側にですね、このように従来型 VM が一つずつ立っていて、その上にですね、アプリケーションが走っているということでありますけども、これがですね、右側のコンテナベースになりますと、一つの Docker 環境の上にですね、プロセスということでコンテナがそれぞれ走りますから、そこが共通のですね、VM 上で走っていくというふうになります。で、これをですね、彼はよく、例えているのが、CD ですね。皆さんよくCD コピーしたりすると思います。そういった時にイメージ化してですね、コピーしたりしたと思うんですけども、それに例えてですね、このアプリケーションというのをパッケージ化、イメージ化して、どこの環境でも動かせるようにしていくと。こういうのがコンテナの世界でございます。
So once we've taken that and we've packaged up our applications, why this starts to become very viral is that packaged application, that Docker file, can now be executed identically on the developer's laptop or on a VM running in VMware or a VM running in Amazon. The consistency of the system, the consistency of the platform means that the system underneath becomes irrelevant. All computers are the same as far as Docker is concerned. And that enables us to embrace this concept of hybrid computing that we talked about a lot around cloud, but it was always nearly impossible to achieve. Now we can really do it.
はい、こちらの図でありますけども、開発環境ですね。ラップトップにバーチャルボックスを入れていただいて、ローカルにこの Docker 環境を入れると。で、それをですね、同じようにですね、この Docker イメージを通じて、プロダクション環境またはステージング環境の方に反映していくと。そういういわゆるアジリティがですね、あるという、ポータビリティがあるということをここで説明しています。
So the analogy, again, as we think about this in terms of what it means from a hybrid perspective, is the best analogy is probably the invention of the browser, the HTML browser, and that for the first time with the browser, we could write a consistent user experience, JavaScript, HTML, Flash, that would deploy across any device, any type of back-end system. With the concept of Docker and a container cloud, we're doing the same thing for machines. We're doing the same thing for laptops, Amazon, VMware, Google Cloud. Any infrastructure, bare metal, can easily now be deployed using Docker, using containers.
前の図でブラウザーがあってですね、HTML で記述されたものっていうのは機種を問わずですね、大体同じように再現した。これは実はコンテナの世界とも一緒なんじゃないかなということで、そこをランチャーを目指していると。つまりそのランチャーを使ってですね、どんなインフラ上に動いているものであっても、他の環境にですね、容易に移行できていくという、そういうポータビリティを目指そうというのを HTML とブラウザに例えてここでご説明しています。
And I'll talk about this concept of container cloud as we go along, this innovation that allows us to pull together infrastructure, resources, and orchestration. But before we move on, I want to just kind of summarize, what is it that containers are changing? Like, what are the benefits companies are realizing from containers? And the first is apps run the same everywhere. I write the code, I execute the code, and I can be confident that nothing is changing between each environment.
まずコードレベルで言えば、まずそのアプリケーションのコードというのは、それぞれですね、一つのコードでどこでも動くんだということを言っております。それはテスト環境であろうと、プロダクション環境であろうと、どこでも動きますということがまず一つ言えます。
The second is my apps run the same wherever they run. So not just in terms of the type of environment and the use of the environment, but also the type of infrastructure. So any server, any VM, or any cloud now behaves the same without me as a developer or me as a DevOps engineer having to change my behavior and my operational approach.
そしてそのコードに基づいたアプリケーションというのは、どんなクラウド上であれ、オンプレミスであれ、いろんなですね、環境上、インフラを問わずですね、動いていくということが2番目としてあります。
This then opens up the biggest opportunity. Once we've standardized this and packaged it up consistently, now all of a sudden it opened up the potential for automation. And it's this layer of automation and orchestration that starts to develop not just benefits around portability and consistency, but real improvements to reliability, real improvements to ability to respond to changes in demand or changes in the environment.
そして3番目ということで、ランチャーを使ってですね、こういったアプリケーションのライフサイクルのマネジメントができると、そしてオートメーションができるということを3番目に言っています。それは例えばハイアベリビリティですとか、DR、ディザスターリカバリー、オートスケーリング、そういったことがですね、ランチャーによって実現する。これが3番目です。
Finally, with all this, the end of the day, what's the business impact? There really are 3 impacts. 2 I have up here, 1 I didn't put on. The first is improved density. We can now reduce the number of servers and infrastructure required to run our workloads because we're able to dedicate smaller and smaller amounts of infrastructure to the application. We really can right-size the infrastructure better than we even have before.
そうすることによってですね、非常にそのデンシティ、密度っていうのが高まっていく。これはいわゆる生産性ということにもなると思いますけど、そういったのが高まっていくこと、そして、ライアビリティということですね、信頼性も高まっていくということになります。
So density improves, reliability improves because we're able to handle high availability and deal with failure. And finally, innovation is quicker. At the end of the day, when the earliest adopters 3 years ago, when we were just starting Rancher, I remember sitting in the Uber offices, sitting in Airbnb offices. Already they were using containers. They said, we can move faster. We can add features quickly. We can come out with new features every week, every day by implementing continuous delivery and using containers to standardize what we do. That's the real benefit. When I show you the customers and their experience, every single one says the same thing. We can innovate faster because we can deploy and not worry about the system breaking down or having issues with compatibility and reliability.
例えばサンフランシスコのですね、ホットベンチャー、ウーバーですとか、そういったホットなハイテクノロジーのですね、ベンチャーもそのコンテナを使って非常に速いサイクルでですね、イノベーションを起こしていくということで、速い開発サイクル、開発運用サイクルを回していくということで選ばれている、その背景がやはりこちらにあると思います。
Looks like I lost my slide. There we go. So what do we do at Rancher? At Rancher, we are bringing together all of these systems to allow for, the challenge with containers is there's still an ecosystem emerging and a lot of integration that has to happen to put together this stack. And at Rancher, we've just made this all very easy. We've embedded Docker, we've embedded networking, we've embedded storage management, we've incorporated Kubernetes and Swarm, and made it incredibly easy for teams to take and deploy an entire container cloud for their developers with a single open source platform. And go ahead.
このランチャーというですね、オープンソースプラットフォームによってさまざまなこのエンタープライズで使われる時のいろんな機能が実装されていくということで、例えばこのアクセスコントロールの部分ですとか、このレジストリーの部分ですとか、その今のDocker単体ではですね、成し得ないようなチームワーク、エンタープライズで利用していく上での欠かせないいろんな機能が、ランチャーによって保管されていくというイメージでございます。
The way to think of Rancher is as a platform that pulls infrastructure from anywhere, implements it in isolated environments for different projects and teams, and then allows the users to orchestrate their containers using Kubernetes, Swarm, Cattle, and deploy all of the applications necessary to run on that. And it's that application deployment and management that is dramatically simplified and made easier through the user experience that we've developed at Cattle and with Rancher.
下にいろんなインフラのアイコンがありますけども、そういったですね、インフラを問わずですね、ランチャーによってさまざまなこのアプリケーションの開発ですとか運用っていうのが行われていくということで、非常にそこにですね、ランチャーのバリューを見出して導入が進んでおります。
So since we launched last year in March, we introduced Rancher 1.0. Rancher was already quite popular at the time in the US, but things have grown enormously since then. By this time last year, we had reached 1 million downloads of the Rancher management server and agents, and the growth was really picking up. By this year, that number has grown from 1 million to 60 million. So more than 60 times the number of infrastructure hosts and management servers deployed. We have more than 20,000 clusters running using Rancher, sending us stats every day. This is the power of open source. With open source, from a single, an idea and a piece of software, by making it free and available to everyone, making it work really well, we've seen enormous adoption.
こちら今ご覧になってます。ちょうど2016年の3月にですね、ランチャー 1.0 をリリースしました。そこから急激に、そのダウンロード成長しておりまして、もう9月の段階では100万ダウンロード、そして今はもう6000万ということですね。今年の9月、ちょうどこの9月、2017年の9月に入りますと、これだけのですね、急激な利用、そしてダウンロードというのが進んでいます。
What's so exciting about this too is that while the adoption has come from lots and lots of startups and web companies, SaaS companies, we've also seen enormous growth among some of the largest companies in the world who have adopted Rancher to roll out enterprise container clouds for their entire teams. The real core of our business is what we think of as enterprise and government. Let's go to the middle of the screen here.
このようにウェブカンパニー、そしてエンタープライズ&ガバメント、サービスプロバイダーとありますけども、カテゴリー別にですね、並んでますが、もう非常に多くのワールドワイドのお客様にご愛用していただいているという事例がございます。
So I'm going to spend a little bit of time that I have remaining and just tell you about some of the stories of these companies, how they're using Rancher, how they're using Docker, how they're using Kubernetes to change how they deliver applications. The first one I want to talk about is a company called Klockner. Klockner is the largest steel company in Germany in terms of trading. They do all of the marketplaces and trading for steel. Very old company. They've been in business since I think the beginning of the 1900s, 1905, something like that. And they had a simple goal. They wanted to transform the way they did trading. It was a very traditional industry, very traditional business, and most of the trading was done over fax. And they wanted to move to a fully automated, digitized pipeline for trading steel. And we worked with them to implement microservices and continuous delivery to make it quicker for them to develop new services for their users.
はい、この、クロックナーというですね、ドイツの、鉄のトレーディングカンパニーということなんですが、非常に大規模なお客様でございまして、従業員としては1万人を超えております。そして歴史も非常に古くて、そのような会社であってもですね、このランチャーを使って、ご覧のようにこの GitLab と組み合わせる形でですね、開発環境、そういったことを構築している事例でございます。
So in their organization, they've implemented 2 big open source projects to now handle this. They're using a tool called GitLab, really powerful alternative to GitHub that is software only, can be deployed on premise, and includes CI as well as a Docker registry. And of course, they're using Rancher to deploy Docker or Kubernetes in their environments. With GitLab and Rancher, they've automated the entire flow. A developer writes code, plug it back in, get it to work. So with GitLab, the user writes, stores, and puts all their test automation into a system. Rancher is the execution environment. Users spin up dev, staging, production environments, in their case in Google Cloud, and automate all steps through that process. So as I write code, it automates spinning up a test environment. It automates running the test against me and providing feedback. When I'm ready, I can push that test into staging, where it's automatically upgrade staging to the next release of the software. Again, runs the tests, again runs the validation tests, validates that it's working correctly in staging, and then finally, once that's done and a person approves it, can move that same release, same set of code into production, and follow that up with another set of tests to validate that the new implementation in production is working as expected as well.
まず左側のこの GitLab の部分でですね、CI/CD のこのオートメーションですとか、コンテナのレジストリというところを使わせていただいて、最近GitLab ミートアップとか言ってですね、日本でもコミュニティ発達してきて、世界中でも導入進んでいるツールでございます。そして右側ランチャーの部分でいうと、やはりこの Google クラウド、GCP を使ってですね、開発環境、ステージング環境、そして本番環境、こういったものをですね、またいで先ほどご説明したポータビリティを生かしてですね、開発環境の統合管理ツールということでランチャーを使っていただいております。
The impact of all of this has been that a few things have changed. The first one is, as they bring on new developers, in the past, to get a new developer up and running in a development environment would take weeks. They would have to build, download special dev environments. They now do it in hours. A new user comes on, they go into a Rancher catalog with one click. They get a full development environment built out on their machines. This is the same approach that Sony PlayStation Group is using for development environments and testing. American Express is doing the same thing with Rancher and Docker for testing. This is a huge improvement in how long it takes to take a developer and get them onto a project with everything they need to be working right on their laptop.
ここでご説明してますのはですね、複数チームで開発運用を回していくといったときにですね、非常にその効率化して、GitLab とランチャーを使ってですね、自動化を果たしていたりだとか、あとは真ん中カタログというのがありますけども、そういったランチャーに特有のですね、便利な機能を使ってですね、非常にその生産性を上げているという事例でございます。
The other big improvements have been around automation. They're able now with a single click to deploy all of the microservices necessary for any application or any set of applications from the catalog. They've been able to deploy automation around upgrades, rollbacks, and any kind of test environment build out. And because of this, they've also cut the amount of infrastructure they use. They've reduced their infrastructure bill on GCE by more than 40%. So big reduction in infrastructure costs and a lot of improvements in automation of how they roll out code.
最後にですね、このイノーマスリダクションというのがありますけども、やはりインフラコストをですね、非常に劇的に下げたというのがあります。そしてやっぱりワンシングルクリックでですね、いろんなデプロイができる。そういったことで、開発運用環境の劇的なですね、効率改善、そしてインフラコストの劇的なですね、低下というのがメリットとしてお客様にありました。
So let's look at another very large organization. A U.S. bank is the 8th largest bank in the United States. They're very large consumer bank. They run banks, I think, in 40 states. They run offices, and they had a really big challenge. They had an enormous amount of data they were gathering in different types of big data pools. But what they were finding was that the ability for researchers and for application developers to leverage that data was actually quite impaired. It took lots of time. It was very hard to set up systems that could access that data. It was very difficult to put the services in production. So they implemented Rancher to empower their data science teams to deploy pipelines around that data to ingest it, transcode it, and perform an analytics on it. And eventually then to use that to produce services that could analyze the data and provide information back to tellers and workers in the bank for things like compliance or upselling customers on opportunities. So in a lot of organizations, data science has been a big focus for the last 5 to 6 years as companies have invested a lot in Hadoop and Kafka and Spark. With a lot of those deployments, the challenge isn't so much now getting the data, it's actually utilizing the data to build applications quickly that can then be analyze the data and test it. And so this is something that Lego is also doing with Rancher.
はい、この US バンクってなかなかちょっと私たちには馴染みありませんけど、本当にUS アメリカでいうとトップ10に入るようなですね、都市銀行みたいな感じで、そのパイプラインですね、ビッグデータの管理をしているわけですけど、ランチャーと組み合わせてですね、そういったものを組み合わせてパイプラインを作り上げているということで、データサイエンティストとともにですね、このランチャーシステムを構築したという非常に本番環境としてはですね、かなり具体的に踏み込んだ使い方、コンテナベースでのランチャー環境として踏み込んだ事例として今この US バンクの事例が挙げられております。
Another very common use case that's very similar to this is IoT devices, and with IoT you also have big pools of data and a need for very quickly changing back end. So a number of companies like Tyco, Honeywell, very traditional manufacturers of devices that go into buildings and homes are using Rancher as well, and they're using Rancher to power the back end for IoT devices and to manage all of those workflows, again tying into big data and the investments they're making around Hadoop.
はい、その他にもですね、かなりランチャーとしてはトラディショナルな企業様とか大企業様との例もありますけども、非常に今回このビッグデータの活用というのでコンテナベースの環境を構築したということで、今これはかなりアメリカ国内でもですね、ランチャーのユースケースとしては非常に目立った例としてご紹介させていただいております。
So the benefits they achieved, the first one, they automated the management of the pipeline around big data. Now, researchers and developers can self-deploy services that leverage that data. They can spin up environments and have access to their data lakes on their own without engaging IT, enabling much faster innovation, and also the ability to develop applications that tie into that data while keeping the data isolated from the developers and the users. So rapid innovation and just improvement to how quickly they can develop and change new applications by leveraging big data.
このビッグデータというのは非常にこの銀行の中に溜まっているわけですけれども、やはりお客様のですね、データ、そして銀行内で持っているデータというのをですね、やっぱどうやって分離して管理していくかという場合に、こういうランチャーを組み合わせてですね、非常にいいシステムを組み上げたということでございます。
In all these cases, the power of Docker and Kubernetes and Rancher is it's taking and making it easier for users to spin up their own infrastructure. In a lot of ways, I mentioned Rancher as a container cloud because what it's doing is it's enabling organizations that maybe still have lots and lots of VMware, lots of vSphere running in their data centers, to put a very light layer over the top, a layer of containers and container orchestrations, and immediately empower hundreds, in some cases thousands of developers and employees to self-service themselves on building and deploying environments, test environments, dev environments, big data environments with just a single click on in a system.
はい、そしてですね、皆さんやはりそのクラウド環境上にランチャーをインストールして動かすという例は当たり前なんですけども、ここで非常に印象的なのはこの VMware さんのですね、環境の上にですね、この銀行のシステムが走っている、ランチャーで走っている。つまりそのインフラストラクチャーを選ばずにですね、どんな環境でも同じように開発運用ができていくというランチャーのメリットを最大限生かしてですね、この VMware 上で動いているランチャーの非常にエンタープライズ事例、重要な事例でございます。
I think I have time for maybe one more. The reality is a lot of the organizations that deploy Rancher also use Rancher for existing applications. They don't necessarily build entirely new or big data applications or web applications on Rancher. They take existing Java applications, existing .NET applications with Windows environments, and they simply containerize them and move them to get better density and better movement. IHME is the Institute for Health Metrics in the United States, and it pulls data from all over the world and provides back very specific information on global health trends, mortality rates, cause of death in every country around the world. And it's a really cool organization. It's funded predominantly by the Bill Gates Foundation.
はい、こちらのですね、教育機関なんですけども、こちらでもランチャーの、運用事例というのをちょっとご紹介したいと思います。
So the focus for the IHME with their project was to transform their IT to give researchers the ability to more quickly deploy their own infrastructure. They really had this goal of self-service and automation, and they were going to move everything. So every server, every system in their organization, they were changing data centers, and they decided to use Rancher to simplify that change as they migrated across systems, while at the same time giving researchers the ability to spin up all of their own infrastructure. So with containers, just with Docker, the developers were quickly able to get access to small subsets of the data, load it locally, and then spin up multi-component applications that put together multiple components all on their laptop, develop, test locally so that they could build new innovations for exposing data to consumers.
先ほどご説明した通りですね、手元で開発したものをどうやって、本番ステージングの方に反映していくかというところの、そういった非常にですね、小さなレベルでのローカル環境から本番環境に移行していくというところにですね、ランチャーを活用していただいているということで、非常に本格的な活用をしていただいている機関でございます。
With Rancher, what they were able to do then is tie those users into their new VMware-based data center as well as Amazon, and allow the developers to spin up test environments in Amazon with that same application. So as I ran locally, now I'm ready to test it with a bit more scale, with a bit more workload against it. I could spin that up in Amazon for my own needs. And when I was ready, then move to staging environments and eventually production environments, all running in VMware, which was the actual data center they had for their own infrastructure choices.
はい、ご覧の通り、テスト環境、これが AWS 上で行われていると。そして、ステージングの方が VMware 上。そしてですね、プロダクション、本番の方でもまた VMware ということで、このように非常にそのランチャーを使ってですね、異なるインフラストラクチャー上に違った環境を展開する。テスト環境、ステージング環境、プロダクション環境、本番環境。こういう例でございます。
Once they had that in place, you can see that the application itself, it really doesn't change. What changes is how it connects to different data sources, how it connects to infrastructure services like load balancers or DNS services, how it scales, how many nodes you apply to it, how it handles things like disaster scenarios and failover if a host goes away. All that automation and orchestration is defined in the application stack, in Rancher, and push through all of these layers of deployment. And the benefits for that are significant. Specifically, they were able to move, they have a lot of data they needed to get access to. They could move the data pipeline much faster. They removed the requirement to have to babysit lots of infrastructure. So IT removed themselves for development and test environments completely. Developers could deploy them, could scale them, could automate them. The researcher really had self-service all the way through to production if they were authorized to make changes in production. So they could develop and deploy new features, test them, validate them, push them out. And if they hit a problem, roll it back. Lots of independence and accountability. And because of this, they effectively standardized how they managed applications across lots of different infrastructure types. The laptop, Amazon, and the development system. They estimate that they now make changes to their systems often multiple times every day, where in the past it was very difficult to make a change every month. So they've moved, sometimes to changing almost 100 times more frequently their applications to add features and improve stability.
この企業インスティテュートのようにですね、もう非常に速い開発ペース、そして 開発運用ペースということで、しかもそれがですね、開発環境、それからステージング、本番環境へのデプロイというのは非常にまたがって、異なるインフラ上でまたがるわけですけども、それが非常にですね、効率化して早くなったということで、もう日に日にどんどんこうアップデートして開発改良していくような環境でランチャーが非常に役立っているという事例でございます。
So what I'll leave you with is that this adoption of containers is happening everywhere. We've worked with people, everyone from Goldman Sachs and Coca-Cola to large government agencies, the CIA, the NSA, really every country in the world. We have users in, if you've heard of it, there's people out there using containers in these places. So adoption has grown really quickly. Even someone like Disney is using containers. If you watch really almost any movie that they produce or look at any website they host, they're working on those things with Rancher. This is from last year's KubeCon, where Disney got up and talked about how they were using Rancher. They had more than 60 applications. He demoed StarWars.com, things like Doctor Strange, the movies, all running on Rancher. Their hosted streaming services all running in Rancher. This technology is production grade. They use, Amazon, Google, on-premise, bare metal, VMware, doesn't matter. Any infrastructure, any application, any scale is being moved here. So I think you can feel very confident that this technology has been tested. It's gone past the first phase. We're now into the second phase of adoption, and I'm very excited about what we'll see from here.
昨年の11月ですね、Kubernetes カンファレンスでディズニーさんのセッションで発表していただきました。非常にランチャーを愛用していただいておりまして、やはりですね、異なるマルチクラウド環境、AWS、Google、オンプレミスとまたがって、このですね、非常に速いペースでの開発運用というのをランチャーを使ってご愛用いただいているというマルチクラウド事例でございます。
And if you look at what they're actually doing, so much of it is about taking infrastructure and allocating, making it easy for different teams to spin up different services while accessing all of the functions of central IT. That's really the goal of the system. And with this, they've been able to accelerate development, make it easier for IT to enforce standards, make sure that security requirements are met and compliance requirements are met, and at the same time, provide self-service to dozens or hundreds of teams across the organization.
はい、最後のスライドで語っておりましたけども、非常にですね、いろいろな種類のチーム、混成チームでの開発をしていくというところで、さまざまな Google、Amazon、VMware、異なったマルチクラウド環境上で、異なったですね、用途、テスト、ステージング、本番と、そういったところが非常にこの混成され、混ざっている、そういったところでですね、大規模な開発チームの共通基盤としてランチャーがご愛用していただいているディズニーさんの大規模事例でございます。
So with that, I'll say thank you. Thank you for your time today. Please ask any questions you have, to Yosuke or any of the team here. I'm happy to answer them as well. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all.
はい、では、今回ですね、ここでシャノンの講演を終わりにさせていただきたいと思います。この後ですね、例えばお名刺交換、休憩時間取りますので、お名刺交換ですとか、あるいは質問ありましたら、私またはシャノンの方に言ってくださればと思います。ちょっと時間の関係でですね、1割にも満たない意訳でございまして大変恐縮ですが、またですね、こちらのスライド等々は共有させていただきますので、まずはシャノンにですね、来日、ありがとうということで、拍手で